Welcome back to the show, my friends. I am your host, Eric Szilagyi. If you've had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it shared on the show here, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. The world wants to hear your experience. It wants to hear your story. So reach out to me and let's get yours on the next episode of Uncomfortable. If you haven't yet, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. And when you do, please make sure that you leave us a 5-star rating and review. That alone is the most important thing that you can do as a listener to help get this show out into the algorithm and out in front of more people. With more people listening, that means more great stories coming your way. Uncomfortable Linktree is now operational and the single best place that you can find anything and everything uncomfortable in one spot. All my episodes, links to the YouTube, links to the Penford Media documentaries that I'm in, that series, I believe there's 5 of them out now. Other podcasts that I have had the pleasure of being on, everything is there. You can find whatever you're looking for. I've had a number of you people reach out to me trying to find certain podcasts that I've been on as a guest. It's all there. That address is Linktree/uncomfortable1, and uncomfortable is spelled like the logo looks, with the lowercase u and the uppercase N. That's also probably the easiest way to find the Eventbrite link for tickets to Bigfoot and Brews and Spirits 2. Don't forget to check out the combo ticket there for September 14th and September 13th. The day of event is on the 14th, but the VIP dinner is the night before on the 13th. The combo ticket is a discounted price from the regular ticket, and it still includes your dinner and a drink. Links to our Patreon, YouTube, and Bigfoot and Brews and Spirits 2 and all things uncomfortable will be found in the link tree. That will be listed in the show notes for you. Now, for tonight's guests, you may remember one of them from episode 101, and the other is new to the show. They're here tonight to talk about their new show, Forgotten Streams of Appalachia, that will be appearing on the Pursuit Network, I believe. So, if you're ready, let's get into it. So if you will, please give a warm, uncomfortable welcome to Mr. Josh Waters and Mr. Joe Woody. Gentlemen, welcome to Uncomfortable.
Thanks, Eric.
Nice to be here, Eric.
It's good to have you guys. Josh, we started this conversation well over a year ago, I believe, when you started telling me about this. And it's finally done, huh? You're finally got it on the tube.
We do, yeah. It's been probably close to a year and a half since you and I talked, and man, this has probably been under development for probably the better part of 9 years with Joe, and talking about these stories and putting it all together while we were in some unsavory locations in support of some different missions with our armed forces. So it's good to finally kind of be on this end of it on the production side and getting some of these stories out there. And man, I got to tell you, it was way more than I thought it would be, as far as, kind of where we went and where these stories led us. So.
Well, Joe, I've not met you before, so it's a pleasure to meet you, sir. And here, sir. You are the host, correct, of the show?
I am. We were, like you said, we're in some places not in this country, and we had some downtime. And after a month of downtime, I just started telling weird and uncomfortable, if you want to call them, things that happened to me out in the Smoky Mountains in the Southern Appalachians. And Josh said, why don't we put this on film in some sort of way? And this is what happened. And here we are 9 years later talking to you.
That's a long time. One, I mean, hell, I've had friendships that haven't lasted 9 years. So, I mean, just that deserves some applause. but you guys both served in the U.S. military, correct?
We actually met each other after our military service was done. We were both in the contracting world at the time and on a certain mission that we had, and that's where we met. I think we met in Kandahar. That's the place we met. I believe it was,
That's a very interesting word to say on a mission that we were on as a contractor.
Mhm.
that,
Yeah.
that sounds a little odd. It was on a job site. It was a job, but as far as, and I understand that military contractors are a little bit different than what most people would think, but it does tend to kind of perk your ears up a little bit and make me want to ask. So what kind of contracting were you guys doing? But I'm not going to do that. So tell me about the show. How, you said that this was based around you sitting around telling stories about some of the weird stuff that you've experienced throughout your lifetime in the Appalachians.
Yeah, it's I didn't really think too much about them. I thought everybody had these experiences, but I've come to find that it's not necessarily the case. You have to spend some time out in the woods. I've spent a little bit of time out in the woods, some of it by myself, not as much as some, maybe more than many. I don't know, but I've had the luck or unfortunate luck, or if that's a word, to have some really interesting experiences out by myself in the middle of the national park, the Great Smoky Mountains. And I would just sit there in a moment of boredom and say, let me tell you about this time this happened to me. And I didn't realize that people were actually listening to it. It was kind of neat.
And Josh, what was the thing that you heard from this gentleman that kind of snapped it all into place for you?
Really, just the stories in general. One thing Joe had mentioned to me early on was that he'd had taken lots of notes and drawn some maps, and since he had done those things, the world had kind of gone digital on us, and he wasn't real sure what to do with that. And I had a small production thing going at the time, and I said, "Well, Joe, have you ever thought about putting it on TV? That's a way to get it out there. There's lots of different ways we could do it, but Joe is a fantastic storyteller. He's also an amazing writer. He's got a book in progress that hopefully this is going to push him and nudge him to get that finished up in the next year. But when you start to hear some of these stories,
It would be a nice tie-in, yeah.
yeah, and when you start to hear some of these stories, you'll see why I thought other people deserve to hear them. And going back to that, the length of time it took us, to kind of get here. Of course, we worked for several years after that. It was, we kind of had to wait until the time was right to not be working overseas constantly. But because we waited, new stories have developed and new stories have come about that we never would have gotten when the show, might have first hit 3, 4, 5 years ago. So with everything in this production, with everything in our friendship, timing has been absolutely everything. And I think that this was, again, it was fortuitous for the timing on when it took us or how long it took us to get it done.
All right. So I don't care which one of you. Josh, you already had your time on the show about 50 some episodes ago. Joe, let's let Joe do some of the talking. Go ahead. Tell everybody the name of the show, how long it has already begun to air. Is that not correct?
It has. It's we're running our first few episodes on the Pursuit channel. Premieres Monday night at 7:30, and Josh could say what the other times are. It runs 3 or 4 times other times during the week. But it's called Forgotten Streams of Appalachia. And it came from an idea we had of the first rendition of the show. We were thinking it was just going to be finding forgotten places, that I come across when I'm out tramping around the woods, right? But the forgotten streams is forgotten culture. You can substitute the word streams for culture. You can substitute the word forgotten for lost. things we've forgotten, things we've lost, people, villages, cemeteries, battlefields, culture, accents. It goes on and on and on. The Southern Appalachians, all of America, but I'm partial to the Southern Appalachians because my family's from here, and I've had the pleasure of exploring these mountains for about 25 years now, and it's so rich in history and lore and mystery, and again, just experiencing some of these things, I consider myself lucky. And if I can tell some of these stories and people will listen to them, hey, even better.
Well, anyone who has ever touched foot within that area, they all say the same thing, that there is a very special a very special oddness to that area. And I mean, it's rife with paranormal stuff. It's rife with Bigfoot encounters. It's rife with dogman encounters. I assume that your show, for the most part, is not necessarily a paranormal show.
Well, that's funny you mentioned that, because in my conversations with Josh and everything, I was like, man, I don't want this to be a paranormal show. I don't want this to be. I don't want to touch on subjects that seem unbelievable, right? But then I realized some of the experiences that I have touch on the unbelievable, and so we decided to not make any claims, not make any things. Hey, this is real. This is what's happening. It's more of an investigation as to what it could have been, and I try to take on a cynical aspect of it. I got to see it. You got to make me believe it. What is it that I actually saw? What did I encounter? What did I hear? Was this real? And that's the legs part of it, because once we start investigating some of these things and talking about it and interviewing people, you realize, hey, there's a strong possibility. Not only is this surreal, but it's real, and it's quite interesting. Some of it went places that, and I think Josh will agree with this, that I did not expect, and I'm very open minded to the mysteries and the spiritualness of the Appalachians. I'm extremely open to it, and I think you have to be open to that for it to happen to you. I mean,
Absolutely.
I talk about it in the show in some aspects, that some people spend days, weeks out in the woods by themselves, and they never even have a wildlife encounter. How? They're everywhere. How?
Yeah.
And it's, in my opinion, what we try to get across in the show is you got to be open to it. First of all, you got to let your mind be open to these things happen to you. And once that happens, everything opens up. The wind through the leaves becomes louder. The birds are chirping louder. You can feel the water going down. It just opens up. And then when that happens, look out, because you'll never know what you'll experience out there.
I agree with that 100%. You do have to have some, you have to allow some culpability in yourself to experience these things. Josh, at what point did you guys get into the production aspects of this, when things started to take a turn where you knew that Woody's desire to not make a paranormal show might have been a little off the mark?
It was like day one. So our very first episode, and the first episode that we intended to shoot, is called The Legend of the Little People. And it's about an encounter that Joe had while he was fishing. I'll toss to him here in a minute. But he had heard some strange voices, and we were going to start there. It's an incredibly intriguing story. It's the newest story that we're going to tell this season. He's got another story that happened a couple weeks ago that, may or may not be anything, but it's interesting to say the least. But so we go into Bryson City, and we drive out to the road of nowhere. It's absolutely beautiful scenery out in the mountains. And Joe says, hey, we've got a decent hike. Well, we've got myself, my, I don't even know what to call Gavin Smith, my videographer, my editor, my, extraordinaire person. I've got to give him some credit before we go much farther. I brought him on at the beginning and gave him, this vision and just said, look, take it and run with it. Here's kind of what I want to see, but I trust you. And everything you see is largely in part, because of him and his vision. So thank you, Gavin. So anyway, we get out there and we're filming and we got a lot of good content and we're at the location. Joe had these experiences and he references going to see an old family graveyard, an old family cemetery that's on the top of this mountain. So our production day went a little longer than expected. So we didn't get out there till, I don't know, 5 o'clock, 5:15. And we had one shot to get, maybe 15 minutes worth of filming. And we had hiked about 6.5 miles, I think, back, give or take. It was a pretty daunting hike across the mountains. And the 1/4 mile hike to the cemetery is just, it might as well just be straight uphill. It's like climbing a ladder. So we get up there and Joe and Gavin are doing this part of the shoot. And it's a one camera shot. It's nothing, I'm not needed. So I decide, unbeknownst to Joe, unbeknownst to Gavin, I've got an EMF detector. Let me go see what I can find. And, I'm not expecting anything, but, there's been some experiences out in this location. So let's just see if there's any type of anomalies. So I sweep this cemetery twice while filming's going on, and I get nothing. The EMF detector stays at green the entire time. So I just, okay, cool. It was just a thought, just something I'm doing by myself. So they're wrapping up what they're doing, and I've got to go to the bathroom. I got to pee. So I decide it's probably a good idea to leave the confines of the cemetery to be respectful. And I go maybe 25 yards outside of what is essentially the entrance. And I'm doing my thing, and I've still got the EMF detector in my pocket. And I started to think, what I had done. And I hadn't said anything. I wasn't talking to supposed peoples or spirits or anything. I just, did a sweep. And I said, man, I've seen a ton of paranormal shows. I've watched, these for years. Let me give this one more shot. So I turn around, I pull my EMF detector out of my pocket, and I introduce myself. I say, hey, look, this is who I am. I'm out here with my good friend Joe Woody and our videographer extraordinaire. My buddy Joe, his last name's Woody. We believe, we know some of his kinfolk are buried here. We're just out here trying to see what's going on, what's happening. If there's anybody that wants to communicate with us, speak with us, this is how you do it. This is the EMF detector. Green is going to be some yeses, reds is, you're close, you can contact that way. But I didn't want to keep it real vague, because I had already done a sweep. So right at the beginning, right at the entrance of the cemetery, we had all dropped our packs, and Joe had a blue pack. So I'm walking towards that, and I said, listen, I'm going to do this one time. If you can get close to me and light this meter up to red, the second I step foot at that blue pack, we'll try to communicate. And now, mind you, I'd spent probably 20 or 30 minutes, doing my baselines and had nothing. And I stepped 1 foot beside that pack, and I stepped my second foot beside that pack, and it pegged red, and it stayed red for about 5 seconds on the EMF. So I perked up real quick. But as soon as that happened, our Gavin, he was like, hey guys, I think I got bit by a snake. And then Joe was in the process of saying some things. And I'll toss to Joe now and let him kind of tell you what his take on it was from there on.
You can see where we're going with this. This was not our intention at all. I am, anyway, let me go back a little bit further. Before we stepped into the cemetery, I always do this as a show of respect. I say a prayer. I say, hey, if we're supposed to be here, let us be here. Let us be respectful. When it's time for us to leave, let us know. And it's been amazing how many times it's let us know, right? And by myself and other things like that. It's I don't even find that unusual. But we said those prayers. So unbeknownst to me, Josh was over. I didn't know where he was at this time. So I'm sitting there in front of this cemetery, this plot. Of her last name was Woody. She was born and died in, I want to say 1870. We're probably related some way. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying a prayer, right? I'm just saying, hey, let me be respectful, and don't let me overstay my welcome. Right when I got that out, right, I had my cross in my hand. I was sitting there and I was going, right when I got that out, Gavin goes down and he goes, I've been snake bit. Right when I said that, right when I got that out of my hand. And right before he went down, there was a ruckus in the trees. Like the squirrels went crazy. The boomers went crazy. And I looked over, Gavin goes down. He goes, I've been snake bit. I was like, what? And I ran over to him. I looked at him. I said, are you in pain? What's going on? And he said, no, I've been snake bit. So I reached down to his ankle where he said he's been snake bit, pulled up his leg, and there were 2 red marks on his socks. I was like, oh, okay, I think you have been snake bit. And I pulled his sock down. There was nothing there. And
so there were red marks on his socks?
Red marks on his socks, just like 2 fangs.
But nothing on the skin?
Nothing on the skin. And I was like, I don't think you've been snake bit, man. I think if you would have been snake bit by a copperhead or a rattlesnake, you would feel the pain. You would feel it by now. I think we're okay. Let's just sit here and get this squared away, because at this point, we're a good 3.5, 4 miles from the car. And it was going to be tough getting him out. He said, okay, we cleared that up. I stood up and I'm looking around. Josh walks over. He's got something in his hand. I didn't know what it was. And he's sitting there and he's still quiet about it this time because he hasn't told me that this was going on. And about that time, I'm standing there and I stand up and look around and I hear right across the cemetery in the woods. You hear that all the time. You might think it's a woodpecker, or we have grouse in the mountains. You hear, their flutter makes a drum sound. It's not that uncommon, but this was like that, right? And I looked at Josh. I said, Josh, did you hear that? And he said, yeah. So he he walks over to the other cemetery, and as the sound is going like that, it starts to move around the cemetery. And
now let me interrupt you real quick. So it starts to move around the cemetery. Yeah. The thudding.
The thudding.
Could you hear like leaves rustling, twigs snapping, anything like that?
No, and I was listening for it because that would be, it would be an animal, but there was nothing. It was just moving. Could have been a bird flying, knocking on a tree, right? Could have been. I'm thinking grouse, but this sound continues to move around the cemetery just outside our vision. It continues to move around. And then I'll let Josh take it from here, but it continues to get weirder and weirder.
Yeah, so Joe mentioned the squirrels going crazy. It was unnatural. Like, they should be getting ready for bed, and they were running up and down trees, scurrying around, chattering. It was multiple squirrels. The only thing I can say is going crazy. It was just, it wasn't natural, squirrel chatter. Like they were scared of something. They were communicating between each other. So yeah, that happens. And then we hear this thumping, this drumming sound. It started off with 2 beats, like Joe said, probably, best we could tell 150, 200 yards away from us. It moved a little closer, and then it would constantly move from left to right, probably within about a 100-degree angle. But it went from 2 to 3, kind of a 2 thump pause, single thump. And then it would do that. And then it would move a little bit, 15, 20 yards within a second or two. But again, we never heard anything on the ground. So I pull out the EMF detector, kind of explain to Joe and Gavin what I've got and what it does real quick. And we start to ask it some questions, or just start to ask questions in general. And, hey, this is how you communicate again. We're going to do greens for yeses, red for nos. and we get some intelligent response. Now, we do have some of this on video that will be shared on our YouTube channel here in the coming weeks. And we will revisit this again later this year. We're going to go back and for lack of better words, we're going to do a paranormal investigation in the cemetery. It's not for the show, but we need some answers. We're trying to get answers for the show and answers about, this legend of the little people. But like Joe said earlier, all of our episodes, all of our ideas and stories are an investigation, and there's multiple ways that these things could lead, and we just follow where it goes. But we did get, for probably close to 15 minutes, I'd say probably 10, 12, 15 intelligent responses. And again, we are, we'd gone closer back to the car. So we're 4.5, 5 miles out. There's no cell service. There's no electricity. We went through and debunked, what we're going to get from the cameras as far as this EMF goes. Of course, we had our phones for, video and content stuff and pictures. And we tested all of those on camera. And our mics and everything, and made sure that we weren't getting interference that way. And we didn't. And kind of as we left it, we would have stayed longer, but we were running out of daylight. The sun was setting. We probably had a solid 2.5 hours to hike back across the mountains in the dark. And after experiencing something like this out in the middle of nowhere, to be slightly unnerved is probably an understatement. But we left it. We asked the question, can we come back? Would you like to communicate with us further? We have some business left out in these woods. Would you like us to come back? And we got split responses. We got 2 yeses and we got a no. So it leads me, just based off some paranormal things and that I've seen and encountered, that we may have been working with several or 2 different, entities or energies, if you will. But we do intend to go back and visit and continue to investigate, is this maybe what Joe experienced, or, what kind of events?
So I want to jump back a little bit to 2 things. One, the sound. All right. Is it more of a drum beat? Is it more of a wood knock, like people would assume that you're hearing, like in Bigfoot experiences? And second of all, Josh, you described the sound moving from left to right by about 100 degrees. For the listeners, if you can kind of, instead of 100 degrees, let's talk about in yards. So if the sound was coming from the right and then quickly moved to the left, what would a good estimate on your end as far as yardage instead of 100 degrees?
All right. So I said, this might show my lack of knowledge between degrees and yards, but I'd say probably the course of distance of 100 to 125 yards. It was definitely a drumming sound. These were not wood knocks. They weren't wood knocks. In my opinion, it wasn't a grouse. Since then I've extensively, YouTubed and looked up grouse sounds. And they are very rhythmic and very drumming, but it's a constant, when they're, attracting attention from mates or whatever. But it was those 2 pause 1, 2 pause 1. Sometimes it would be 3, but they moved from left to right, back and forth for about 10 minutes, and probably traversed anywhere between 125 yards, back and forth.
I really think I heard it not only the 125 yards all the way to the front. I heard it to our rear as well. It wasn't, like you said, I went back and listened to grouse sounds. I've heard it. I want to say it's not a grouse, because a grouse is very common and it's very fast and it's like a flutter, but it's a deep flutter. I thought it might have been a woodpecker, banging on a tree. I've heard that before, but this was more of a like that, like a drum. It had my mind going in several different directions. I didn't know what it was, to be honest with you. And I spent a lot of time out there, and maybe somebody more knowledgeable can tell me. But it was really interesting. It was really interesting. Now, like I said, I did not want this to be a paranormal investigation. This is not where I wanted it to go. I've got, uh, you know, it's not what I wanted to have, and it turned into it. And we still can't explain it. Everything that went down at that time, we still can't explain it. And I have a hard time. Actually, I don't tell that story a lot. Now I'm telling it to the whole world because I have a reputation. I have a magazine. I don't want to be known as, I don't want people thinking I'm crazy, right? Yeah, the guy spent too much time out in the woods. But that's what the story is. We don't know what it was, right? We don't know what it was. I can generally explain those things. I've been out there enough to hear them, but this one, with everything going on at the same time, was weird. It was weird. And hopefully we can get to the bottom of it. I doubt we will. It's just something, and that's not the only thing that's happened in that location. It's just that whole area it's not spooky. I wouldn't want to call it spooky if you're respectful of whatever's happening out there. It can be if you construe it that way. Of course, we're in a cemetery at dark in the woods where I've had interesting things happen to me. It made me think, but it was interesting to say the least. And that's coming from a guy who kind of cynical sometimes in some aspects. A lot of aspects I am.
Well, in some aspects, you say that you're cynical, and I assume that by that you mean that you're quite skeptical of these things. Yet you also indicate that you've had a number of things like this happen throughout your life. So you are open to these experiences, yet you question what they are. And I think anybody who has a critical mind is going to do that when they have an experience. The difference between us and some other people are they would jump quickly to the explanation that it was just the wind, or it was this, or it was that, and we entertain the idea that it was something possibly other natural.
Yeah, we don't know what it was. We don't know, and that's the interesting thing about the show is we're trying to find out what it was. We're trying to figure out what it was. Has anyone else had these experiences out there? And from the investigations that we've had and the people we've talked to, yes, they have had the same type of experiences. I had no idea the path I was going to walk down with the little people episode. No idea. I didn't even know about it. And I just happened to look it up, right, on what it was. And it was exactly what I did. The people I talked to, we ran into other people who had the same experience. And the story itself is just, I didn't tell anybody for weeks after this. I didn't want to sound, a little bit off my rocker. I didn't want that to happen. But as we investigated it and we talked to Cherokee mythologists and people with experiences like that, it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. And you just got to have in mind that's willing to accept that something is possible.
So this was the first episode. So your desire not to turn this into a paranormal show kind of quickly went out the window, whether you liked it or not. Have you resigned yourself to it now being a critical look at paranormal activity within the Appalachian region?
As long as it's critical, I don't want to be just willy-nilly. Anything's possible out there. You've seen some stuff. That I'm not so sure now. Does that make sense? Some of the things I've heard in the past, I would just, that's not. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm talking about little people and paranormal in a cemetery. What's the difference in my conversation and their conversation? So our goal, I think, is to be an investigative show and not make any conclusions, let people come to their own conclusions, and just give the information out there as it happened, as it actually happened, and let people say, I know this sounds crazy. I know that, but this happened on this day and I was part of it and I don't know what it was. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Are you guys going into this with kind of a double? Is each episode going into something with a predetermined storyline, a predetermined investigation of XYZ, and if something happens, it happens, and the show will alter to meet that, or are you actually looking for the weird to happen?
So
I'll let Josh go ahead and answer that one.
We're kind of determined to tell these stories, Joe's experiences as they happen. There's going to be some reenactment a little bit in there. As far as the TV piece of it goes, we're not looking for anything paranormal. If it happens like it did this time, and you'll see when you go watch the episode, we address that graveyard, that cemetery in the opening scene, and we don't talk about it again. No, that's kind of double-sided. That's going to be a good toss to, a future podcast and YouTube and those things. But that's not where we're going. We will investigate these stories. And this is just one particular story that has a paranormal turn. The legend of the little people. Our fourth and fifth episodes are talking about an encounter that Joe had with a serial killer. We investigate the tar out of that, but there's no paranormal aspect to it. So whatever the stories and experiences that Joe's had, we're trying to keep an open mind, of course, with where those legs take us, and to tell his stories as accurately as possible. But just like with the little people, how we've kind of turned down this other trail, with that investigation, we've met another individual that had very similar circumstances not too far from this location. We sit down and talk with Miss Kathy Littlejohn, who is one of the very few Cherokee Native American storytellers left, that is preserving the stories of the Cherokee Nation. And she gives us some really good insight and some documented evidence of the little people to lend some credibility to this story. But again, with the serial killer, we went from Joe's experience and what he had, and we go back and show those locations where we believe he met a serial killer in the woods, and I'll let him talk about that here in a minute. But that investigation led us to somebody that Joe's had dealings with for years, a gentleman, Eugene Schuler, who owns a fly fishing shop, who Joe had never known that he had encountered with this gentleman as well a few months prior to Joe. So as we investigate that, new things come up. We, as Joe and I, this past fall, were talking about that particular episode in post-production and, what this gentleman told Joe when he met him. I had this light bulb experience where I said, Joe, wait a minute. This guy said he was, putting together new equipment, but if he did what he said he did, if he hiked in from where he, said he hiked in, he would have put his tent together probably 3 or 4 times before Joe met him. And that unraveled this huge ball, if you will, where, we probably sat there and brainstormed for an hour and realizing where we think where his story unravels and possibly may lead to some information about a missing woman that he is yet to claim responsibility for. So again, to kind of answer that question, we're telling Joe's stories and experiences and letting that investigation and that information, as we try to find it, lead us where it may. If it's paranormal, it's probably not going to make the show unless it's just extraordinary and we can't leave it out, because of where we're at in the story. Otherwise, those things will move on to YouTube or other streaming services later on. And also keeping in mind that we're on a fishing or we're on a sport network. We're on the Pursuit channel. Their slogan is all things outdoors. So it helps encompass, and they like the idea of, storytelling. Right. And a kind of a new approach to outdoor TV, but as a producer, I need to keep in mind, where that audience is and who the audience is. So we're going to do our best to keep it, straight and just touch on these issues if they come up. And then later on in podcast and YouTube, really dive deep into, the fringe theories that may come about for some of this.
Interesting stuff. Now, you alluded, Josh, at the beginning of this, maybe prior to us going live, about an experience that Joe had very recently.
Yeah. So it could be.
Was this a?
Excuse me.
Was this related to the filming of an episode, or?
It's another one of those things, man, where it's just so weird. It is related to an episode, but it was a complete different. And I'm sorry, Josh. I'll go ahead and let you talk, but it's just something to add on to another episode that is just beyond surreal. And
let me before excuse me, before Josh gets into that, I want to jump in and say, have you considered the possibility that you're just not arbitrarily running into these things? Do you think that it quite possibly has something to do with you as being the personality involved in front of the camera?
Well, all this happened many of these things happened before I was, we thought about the TV show. Something very interesting. And here we go. Someone, Cherry Kathy, told me about one of the experiences out there. She said, and David Ramsey also said it when his experience. I feel very fortunate for these things to happen to me, and I should be honored. It doesn't happen a lot, especially some of the things that I may have experienced, whatever they may be, right? Kathy Littlejohn told me specifically, she goes, Joe, I think they were there to protect you and to warn you not to go any further. And now, if you watch the show and you watch the other things that happened with the park rangers warning me not to go, to be careful and not to go any further, and those type of things, that leads some credence to that, right? Why were they there? Why did I'm saying they? Why are they there? Why did this happen to me? Why did I have this experience? Whether it was, why did it happen? It seemed like it was an attempt to keep me out of trouble. I don't. That's hard to say and be thought of in a cogent manner. But she was that was her opinion. Now we go back to this other thing that Josh is referring to, and I haven't really told anybody about this. I told Josh because it had direct correlation to our Little People episode. I went back. I was spending a few days out in the Smokies about 3 weeks ago, about a month ago, probably. And I was going to the stream. I was going to explore the stream for a couple of days. The stream didn't turn out to be what I thought it was. So I changed plans. Fortuitous, I went back in my canoe. We went upriver, and they were going to drop me off at a place called in another stream in the Smokies. Couldn't get to it because the water was too low. Change 2. Change 3, I was going to get dropped off at another trail, walk over a mountain, walk down, and come back into this camp spot I wanted to stay. And I got into the campsite. It was all torn up by hogs. It's nothing unnormal. It's not abnormal for that to happen, especially this time of year. They're coming down from the mountains to get out of the cold, come down a little warmer weather. They're torn up all around the campsite where I was camping. And I go out to the oh god, I get insane. I go out to the creek, and I'm just standing there, right? I'm just standing there, and right in front of me, kerploosh, right in front of me. What was it? Was it a beaver coming up splashing his tail? I didn't see the beaver. Right, I didn't see it. Generally, you can see it swimming away. I didn't see the beaver. I said, okay, it's an otter, but an otter doesn't make that sound with its. A beaver does when it slaps. It's like a kerplunk. It's very loud. I've been spooked by them before, and I love to track. So I walk up the side of the creek and I'm looking for tracks, and I see some some fox tracks, some coyote tracks, and I'm looking at it. I go all the way up and down this creek, and then I come back, I fix some dinner, eat to dinner, and I've got my flashlight out. It's dark this time. I walk back over to the creek, kerploosh, right in front of me, and I was like, okay, I guess the beaver doesn't want me at the creek, so I went back, ate, went to bed fairly early. I was the only person there, and for several months, I didn't see anybody else. I'd been in there for weeks, and so I came up. I was awoken about 12:30 with this ungodly screaming and hogs fighting and fornicating and whatever they're doing right outside my tent. Right? Scared the crap out of me. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I hear right at my head, where my head is, right at my tent. I hear this breathing out and breathing in, like that. I'm like, okay, that's a bear. That's a bear right outside my tent. I'm sitting here. I got my Glock on my daggum chest. I'm sitting there and I'm just trying to be quiet, because if I have to fire a weapon, these pigs, these hogs are going to go bananas and run through my tent. And they got these big claws, big teeth, and that'll rip through my tent and rip me. So I wasn't going to shoot. And this thing was breathing right outside my tent. And all of a sudden, the hogs just, because generally hogs and bears aren't going to commingle. They're not going to.
I was going to say, it seemed like a very odd grouping of animals there.
And I was like that, but that sounded like a bear. And all of a sudden I heard just squealing, the pigs squealing. I don't know how many were out there. There's probably 3, but it sounded like 30, and they just something scared them off. They just ran and squealed and ran off. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. Right. And so the next morning I get up, I go back out to the river, and it's quiet, serene. And I walk down where I was looking on the beach, where the muddy beach was, right there. And all of a sudden, there's 2 little kids' footprints there, barefoot footprints. And I went, that wasn't there last night. It was not there. And mind you, it's little kids' barefoot footprints, and we're it's a 30-minute boat ride to get where I am, and then another half mile up the trail, and you can't get across the river. So there's no kids out there, right? So something scared those pigs off, and whatever was breathing at my head scared it off. And all of a sudden, either I missed them or something weird was going on in the Smokies that night. And that, I guess that's a long story, but that has implications to the little people story that we talked about. And it seems to happen to me. Maybe they are trying to protect me. I don't know. I mean, I'm fortunate they are. It makes you want to be respectful of when you go out in the woods and pay homage to whatever's out there. I call it a great spirit. I think our Jesus Christ is there. That's to me, that's what the Great Spirit is. But again, it's just weird, man. Just weird stuff all the time.
I mean, maybe I'm too far seated into the Bigfoot community, because when you were talking about the loud, breathy inhales and exhales at your head, I was thinking Bigfoot. When you said you saw the little children-sized feet, I was thinking juvenile Sasquatch. my understanding of the little people, in a very little limited knowledge base of it, is that they are considerably smaller, not just like the size of children, but almost, doll size. How big were these tracks that you saw?
Exactly like you think a child's footprint would be in bare feet.
So 3.5, 4 inches long.
Yeah, not any bigger.
And
Not,
you go to the little people, and I go to the possibility of a juvenile Sasquatch standing on the shore while Dad was breathing in your face and scaring off the pigs.
I can't go there. Josh and I talk about this all the time. I have a hard time going there. I haven't had any type of experience other than one, but I can't go there yet. I haven't had that experience. I haven't. I wish it was true, man. I do. I would love to. I have hope that it's true and that they're out there. But I haven't had the experiences with that as I have with the spiritual world and the smoke. Because I haven't had that personal experience. And the one incident that was more of a wood knocking scenario that woke me up in the middle of the night again by myself. Again, these things happen by myself, which leads credence to the world that I'm a little bit bonkers, but it was definitely a wood knock. Two, it woke me up from a deep sleep and did it again. And I don't know what that was. I mean, I personally have a hard time. I haven't had that experience yet, so I can't speak from experience about that, other than just the little wood knock I had. And that could be a tree falling on a rock. Could be. I don't know, but.
This is what I love about having named this show Uncomfortable, because it's obviously made you uncomfortable to talk about these things.
Yeah. Josh had to really convince me on a lot of these things, but once I got into it, the stories are just so compelling. And, they're the truth. They're exactly what happened is the way I talk about them. Right. And what are they? I don't know. And I think I'm much more open to the fact of what it could be. 6 months ago, I wasn't. But in our investigation with this, I think I told Dave Ramsey, who had another experience. I said, "Look, man, I don't know about you. This is life changing. This makes you look at things in a different way. What could this be? And the fact is, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I'll let people draw their own conclusions. But the spiritual side of me knows that something spiritual happened. I know that.
Well, I think when you take into consideration all of the experiences that you've had throughout your life, and then I don't know if you've gone back and listened to episode 101 with Josh. He has a laundry list of things that he's experienced. What about your cameraman? Is he open-minded and a little freaked out by some of the things that you guys are coming across?
So Gavin is not very open-minded. Joe and I kind of laugh and joke with him and together that, the more he hangs out with us, the more, we're going to open his mind. He's very black and white, good, bad type thinking. So he's not real sure. He was definitely uncomfortable in the graveyard after, I busted out the EMF and all events took place. And funny, so we finally decide we have to pack up. Like the sun is down, it is below the horizon. We need to leave, and Gavin is leading the way out of the cemetery there, and he hears something, and he turns around pretty quick, and I heard it. I don't remember if Joe did, and it could have been a bear, but it was definitely a very breathy sound, big huff, or I don't want to call it guttural, but I mean it was deep and breathy. Came from what would have been behind us. No rustling in the leaves, no trees breaking. Typically if you jump a bear and it takes off, you hear a 300-400 pound critter running down the side of the hill. There's nothing like that, but he got to experience kind of something on his own first, if you will. He still hasn't decided that he's going to, entertain the thoughts and ideas that Joe and I are just yet. But I think we've got him curious, if nothing else.
Yeah, sometimes he listens to us, and you can see the thought process going. It's like, oh wow, I didn't sign on for this. This is a little weird.
Well, I got to ask this, Josh, because of the giants that we talked about in your episode 101, and then Joe, you brought up the Kandahar. Is there anything from that area that you were ever made privy to, as far as any unknown stuff that was going on there?
As far as I'm concerned, I did have that experience with the giant shadows. Not necessarily giants, but they were shadows of giant
Right.
bipedal, objects. And Joe could probably talk about this a little more possibly. But there are stories that you hear from some of the villages. There's several out there that I'm aware of. That dye their hair orange and red. They dye their goats orange and red at a certain time every year, and I'm told that's to honor the giants that live there or did live there. There's some fringe stories. I think you may have had a couple of them. I think Tony probably did. About, I know you did too, the giants of Kandahar. So you hear some of those fantastical stories, on the folks that'll entertain them. But I never heard those while I was there. I had that personal experience, but I did, meet several folks, several locals that, would dye their hair that way. And that's pretty much the story. It was, in honor of these other people that lived out in the mountains in the caves. But I don't know. I know Joe spent a lot more time kind of out and dealing with locals. I don't know if he had anything like that. Did you, Joe?
I can't really say yes to that. I look at it. Some of the local guys that I would speak to would tell me things sometimes, and this was, pre little people experience for me. I'm like, oh, my thought was, okay, that's your belief. I didn't know any of the stories until afterwards. I saw some of the stories online. I never had any personal experiences with that. You can take those for what you want with them. Some of the people who are selling seem credible. I've never had any personal experience with them, but recently I do know this, that when, and I've been fortunate enough to talk with, people and tribes in a lot of different places in Africa and the Middle East and other places. And those stories are passed down, and they generally, and you can see that in our conversations with some of the Cherokee storyteller, Kathy, it's not myth to them. It's not. It is wholeheartedly it, and I'm not comparing the Cherokee storyteller to the Afghans. I'm not making any type of comparisons. But if you talk with people from the tribe, it's not a myth. They shared some stuff with us. They promised. I felt honored they shared it with me, and I promised I would never tell, and I never will. Some of the things they told me were really, really interesting. Same thing with the tribal regions in Afghanistan and all throughout that area. They believe these things, and people had experiences. What they were, I wasn't there. I can't tell you, but a lot of times those stories are based in some type of fact from generations before. So you can take for that what it is. But there are a lot of interesting stories out there.
Well, I've always paid attention to the First Nations, the Native American oral tradition. You know, those stories are passed down generation after generation after generation, and it is stone cold belief to them. So that's something that has always struck me about their culture and any culture that derives their historical accounts in the same way.
It is, and with the conversations I've had, from being a cynical bastard, right? Me, and I say I am. Other people, obviously, people say I can't be because I'm talking about these things. But after and talking to folks and seeing the belief in their eyes and seeing the how sincere they are in their belief system and these things that are happening and their own personal experiences, you can't help by not giving credence to it. It's and I can just talk about the things that have happened to me. I can't talk about some of the other things. I'm just talking about the specific things that have happened to me. You can't help by coming away from those conversations and the belief systems that are there and how serious they take it without saying, okay, this is no longer something to be mocked. It's no longer something to chuckle about. This is serious. They believe it wholeheartedly. And that belief, if you let it and you're open-minded to it, will affect the way you look at things. It will.
Can you go into as far as the little people? I've heard of the little people. I've heard of the duende. There's several other names. Different cultures have them. Which in itself is very interesting to me because, how many cultures have stories about Bigfoot? How many cultures or a very similar creature? How many cultures have dragons in their history? And the little people, like most of your conversation sounds like a lot of your conversation about that area that you were in was with Native Americans, First Nations people. The information that you derived from those conversations, I know you said there's some stuff you promised you'd never talk about, but are these relative to Native Americans? Are they did you ever get anywhere as far as the origin of these things? What are they? Who are they?
Just in the stuff that I've read and things that people have told me, I don't, they were here way before us. Does that make sense? In their belief system, and it's always been part of the culture. It's never been questioned. Now, I'm not saying it's 99, 100% not questioned. I don't think that's the case, but I have a conversation with somebody on the reservation, if they'll talk to you. Now, a lot of them will not. It can be construed as taboo to talk about it with someone else, and some people believe that, some people don't. But if you were to have a conversation with them, it's not a conversation about. It's not a ghost story, right? It's not a ghost story. It's a reality, and it's been part of their culture since time memorial. Not only with the Cherokee, but every tribal. From the research that I've done, maybe not every tribe, but it goes through many different tribes have this same story in different parts of the country, different parts of North America, South America. Heck, think of the elves and we have the same stories going back time and more. It's been there, and it's not taken lightly.
Interesting stuff. The world has got a lot of weird things out there.
It's I think if we have no idea, the things that are around us. There's things that we can see, and there's things that we can hear and feel. Ever so often, if you get a little tiny smidgen, little glimpse of something that you can't explain, and something that's that makes you think, and ever so often, if you're open to it, and you let it happen, you'll get it happens.
And it comes up so often in my show that and I guess it's my perspective on these things. It's like my big questions are we getting to peer beyond the veil? Are we seeing beyond, or is there something that's happening? Is it geographical? Is it metaphysical? Is it any number of different things that is allowing us to view outside of our normal perception and see them in their existence? Or is it just the complete opposite? Are they actually coming into our perception? It comes up a lot with, a lot of the encounters that people have with Bigfoot, that they seem to just kind of appear and disappear at will. It often, it boggles my mind, because it's like, what's going on here? Because our visual acuity is only within a certain range of frequencies. Our hearing is only within a certain range of frequency. We can't see in infrared. We can't see in ultraviolet, but there are other natural born creatures that can see in multiple frequencies of light. We can't hear like a dog can hear. They can hear frequencies higher than we can. So it just strikes me that, we're in such a box as far as our senses are concerned. Are we getting to, by whatever means, get to view them in their existence, or are they actually coming into ours? Do we coexist in this world side by side, but we can't perceive each other most times? And what is that's keeping that? I could just sit there and ask questions in my own brain for hours and hours.
I think it's a valid question, and if you look at it look at it in religion, right? If you look at it in the thought of religion, and that's there all the time. It's not that big of a stretch. There's the spiritual world in religion that most people, if they claim to be religious, whether they're Christians or they believe in a rock, right? We believe in some type of spiritual world. And I, as a Christian, I believe strongly in some type of spiritual world. It's part of who we are. So if you take that idea that the spiritual world is there and we don't know what all it is, it's not that far of a stretch, is it? Is it?
I don't think so.
No, it's not.
I mean, I think it makes more sense to accept the possibility that there are these other things going on, rather than to believe in that spiritual world based or tied to your religion, whatever that may be, and then deny the possibility that any of this other stuff can happen when your whole belief system is based on supernatural events. So I think it only makes sense that we remain open-minded, and
And I'm not sure if there is any difference in what may have happened to me, I don't know. Maybe I had just been open. Maybe I was praying. We don't know. And, but we just know, I just know something strange happened, and not just on one occasion, on many occasions. Those are just some of the stupid, crazy stuff that I've had to encounter. A lot of times I haven't said anything because, I don't want to say anything. I'll tell my wife, and she'll just look at me like, "What are you talking about? You're going off. You've been overseas too long. What are you doing?" And Josh probably has may have a different opinion than I do, but if you're completely closed off to it, right? If you're completely closed off, it's definitely not going to happen. You're just not going to see the forest. You're not going to see that tree in the forest, or you're not going to see forest for the trees, I think is what I'm trying to say. But you got to, if you get your, I call them forest legs, Eric. If you get your forest legs and your forest ears, and you're open to just have somewhat of an open mind, then these things can happen. But if you don't, forget about it. You're not going to see. Josh, you remember when we went out to Forney Creek, and I said a prayer. And I was like, if we, this was before the cemetery, before we started shooting. I said, hey, if it's okay for us to be here, let us know. Right, let us know. And right after, because I'd walked away from them, because you don't want to say, it's a personal thing. You say it to yourself. And I turned around. There were 2 deer, walked out of the woods and walked right up behind Josh and Gavin. And I turned around to him and I hollered at him. Remember that, Josh? And
yeah, I do.
I said, look behind you. And there's 2 deer. Go ahead and you tell the story.
Yeah, so we had kind of stopped and taken a break for a moment and getting some snacks. We've been filming for a while. And yeah, Joe kind of walked over across this little bridge, and cameras and everything were on the ground at this point. And, we didn't know that he had, said a prayer or said anything, out there as far as, any type of energy goes. And he turns around and just kind of motions us for us to turn around. And there were 2 deer at this point, probably 30 yards that came out of the woods that we had just passed there. And we're not being quiet. We're not intentionally making noise, but, we're hiking through the woods. And we turned cameras on, and these deer came up to within maybe 10 feet of our cameras, and then just stayed there for 20 or 30 minutes. Like, they did not care that we were there. They went about their business. They ate and foraged, and we went about our business after about 10 minutes and realized, like, okay, they're not worried about us being here. And then we kind of later on had that discussion, and Joe let us in on what he had done. But I think we all kind of went away with the understanding or the feeling that was acceptance from, whatever energy is there, whatever you believe, whatever, belief system you back, as long as you do believe there's an energy there, that was, their acceptance to us being there. We were being incredibly respectful and polite, and try to leave as minimal footprint everywhere we go. But yeah, the fact that, they weren't spooked and walked right up to us. I mean, I think if we wanted to, we probably could have pet them. It was that docile of an encounter. And then for them to just hang around while we filmed, and we went about our thing, and we filmed stuff, and they just hung out. They'd look at us, they'd eat, they'd walk around us, and it was strange. And you'll see it on some of our footage. Some of those scenes carry out through multiple episodes, but it was very special, to say the least.
Sounds like you got a gift to me.
They walked right at one point. They walked right up to Gavin's camera. Just walked right and just looked right into the camera, like I'm looking into the camera here. And Gavin's sitting on the ground with his camera on his shoulder, and they walked right up to him. Now, again, In a lot of those campgrounds, I call them camp deer. They hang around the campgrounds, and what they're doing is waiting for someone to use the bathroom, and they won't salt so much. Right? They'll go up and sniff where you use the bathroom, and then they'll eat that grass where you use the bathroom because they're looking for salt. Could that been it? Could that have been it? But the irony is I had just gotten that out of my mouth, looking for some type of sign that it was okay for us to be there, and there it was. It came right up and said, "Yes, you're good." Uh, am I looking too much into that? Maybe, I don't know. But it was kind of special, like Josh said.
Guys, let's point people in the direction of how they can find your productions and where it's airing, when it's airing, and everything else you have going on with it.
We're currently on the Pursuit channel, Monday nights at 7:30 Eastern time, Tuesday mornings at 10 Eastern. We do an overnight on Thursdays. So our fourth episode will be coming next Monday. However, on the 13th of May, we're going to recycle our first 6 episodes. They'll be in order. We ran into a few snags early on with some of our episodes not falling the way they should have. So on 13 May, we'll have all of our episodes in the proper order. And then just kind of stay tuned. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram at Forgotten_Streams on Instagram. We'll have, our videos, of course, just regular content there, and any updates on the show as we move forward. We are in the process of working through starting a podcast that will follow this current quarter, or the second quarter or follow quarter, where we'll get to dive really deep into these topics, kind of what we've done here. But we'll be able to speak a little bit more about the information and the topics on these episodes. We can't give everything away being on TV. But once everything has been out there, we'll dive deep into these topics. We'll take questions and really get into kind of the weeds of what we've done in these investigations. And we briefly talked on the serial killer, but how far we're going to dive into that one with private investigators, with cadaver dogs. It has really turned into something. So that's where you can find us, and just continue to follow us on those means, and we'll continue to put out updates probably every week as to where we're going and what's coming down the pipe. But we're really looking forward to getting the show out there, getting folks watching it, and hearing these stories and taking opinions on maybe other people have had these experiences. So we're excited, man. I appreciate you putting us on and letting us tell our stories and get the information of our show out there. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I've always enjoyed our conversations, Josh and Joe. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and hopefully we'll continue a relationship with you as well. So
Absolutely.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you guys on. Make sure to go check them out on the Pursuit channel. I got excited because I found out that my Samsung has built-in streaming service as far as the Samsung channels, and Pursuit channel is one of them. So I'll look forward to catching those episodes on that. Other than that, any closing words that you guys want to get in before we close this up?
You mentioned streaming, and I did forget. So you can also find us on Sling, and something that's really cheap if you're just interested in the show is the Friendly app. Pursuit is there. It's $10 a month. They're no way endorsed, but they're easy to get to. But otherwise, no, man, we just appreciate getting a chance to talk with you, and we'll look forward to coming back on, as we start to uncover some new things.
Absolutely. And keep me in mind when you get the podcast going. Do you have a tentative name for that yet?
It will likely be Forgotten Appalachia. That's going to be kind of our overarching umbrella or brand, if you will. But yeah, I will absolutely look to you for some advice in helping us get that launched. I firmly believe in everything you do and how you do it, and in your quality. And I haven't gotten a chance until today to see any of the video content, but I'm super stoked for how far you've come just in the last year since we've talked. But I absolutely look forward to getting with you on helping us figure that piece out. That's the newest thing we got to figure out. So I'll definitely do that.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time. Great stories. Can't wait to see the episodes. Look for them on the Pursuit channel. It is called Forgotten Streams of Appalachia. You've been listening to Joe Woody and Josh Waters from that production crew. Until next week, stay uncomfortable, my friends.